October 7th, 2023 was supposed to be a day of celebration for the Jewish people and for the citizens of the State of Israel. It's the time when disciples of the Jewish faith conclude the reading of their holy book, the Torah, and they immediately turn the page towards the story of Genesis, the story of creation. But on that same day, Hamas terrorists decided to launch a massacre, not of creation, but of destruction upon the people of Israel. On that day, Hamas terrorists massacred 1,200 innocent Israelis. They raped Israeli women, they murdered Israeli children, and they took 250 Israelis into captivity inside the Gaza Strip to be held as hostages. As a consequence of that, Israel today is in the midst of a war for its very existence, fighting against enemies on 7 fronts, fighting to return and retrieve our hostages, fighting to give our citizens safety in their land. Out of that war have come stories of incredible sacrifice and heroism. In this program, I'm going to show you the stories of the injured soldiers of the Israel Defense Forces, of the police officers who bravely fought off the onslaught of Hamas. I'm going to show you the stories of the survivors of the kibbutzim that were massacred on that dreadful day.
And I would be happy to one day sit down and have this argument with them.
I'm Benjamin Anthony, CEO of the Miriam Institute, and this is Israel Outside In, the October 7 Chronicles. Amir Tibon, thanks very much for sitting with me, especially here in your home, here in Nahal Oz. I think everybody should know that we're good friends. We go back at least a decade. And I very much appreciate you making time to speak to me. I have a sheet here, but it's empty, because I want this to be a conversation with friends. I'm going to take notes in the midst of it, and that'll jolt some questions. First thing that I want people to understand is how you ended up, in the first place, living in Nahal Oz, because I think it's a fascinating personal story. And I'd like you to talk about that.
Hi, Benjamin. First of all, it's good to see you, and it's good to be here with you in my home. Although, as you know, my family and we don't live here at the moment because this kibbutz is still an active war zone, and it's not an appropriate place for children to be. But it's good enough right now for us to have the conversation. Miri, my wife, and I moved here in October of 2014. 2 months before we came here, there was a war between Israel and Hamas, the war of summer 2014. We also call it Operation Protective Edge. And it lasted for 2 long months, very intense fighting. And during that war, Nahal Oz was officially the most bombarded place in the entire state of Israel. Nahal Oz is the closest Israeli community to Gaza City. We're sitting here now in my home, and we are less than 1 kilometer from the border with Gaza, and beyond it, the Sajaiya neighborhood of Gaza City. And because it is so close to Gaza, it is not protected by Iron Dome, which means that it's a very easy target for Hamas, because if they bomb Tel Aviv, for example, with their long-range rockets, it's good for publicity, but most chances are that Iron Dome will intercept the rocket. When they fire at this kibbutz, there is nothing that can stop their mortars and their rockets from landing and potentially killing people. And unfortunately, in the last week of the 2014 war, this kibbutz suffered a terrible tragedy. A 4-year-old child by the name of Daniel Tregerman was killed by a mortar that came from Gaza. And I want to explain something, because people right now may be asking themselves, why was this 4-year-old child even in the kibbutz during the war? One of the problematic aspects of Israel's wars with Gaza over the years is that when you're fighting a war and you have civilian communities on the border, you really need to take care of their evacuation and to find solutions for them and to make sure that people have decent living conditions. And in the 2014 war, this is something that Israel failed to do at large. And in the last days of the war, there was a sense that a ceasefire was arriving and families began to return to the border communities too early. And that's when this tragedy happened. And that's one of the reasons, by the way, why when we're speaking here right now, we know that there are no children in this community at the moment. There are just a few people, adults living here and doing some necessary things that have to be done. After that tragedy, in the summer of 2014, more than 15 families, 15, just got up and said, we are leaving this kibbutz, we're leaving this community. Nahal Oz at the time had a population of close to 400 residents, and almost overnight, it went below 300. More than a quarter of the population left. But at the same time, a fascinating phenomenon began of young couples and families who did the journey in the other direction, who decided to come and live here. And I'm proud to say that Miri and I were part of that story. The war ended in late August 2014. We heard about the situation here. I had visited this kibbutz during the war to write about it. And we just took a decision to move from Tel Aviv, where we were living at the time, over here to Nahal Oz. It was an ideological decision, and I can talk about the ideology later if you want. It was an adventurous decision, if you will. I think we both wanted to do something meaningful and feel that we are part of a larger story. And we felt that it was important to come here and become part of this community at that moment. And we were not alone. We were part of a phenomenon, a trend, maybe you can call it. We came here out of a choice, and we stayed because we fell in love with the place, with the community, with the people, with the surroundings, the open fields, and the beautiful land. And Nahal Oz became our home. And while we chose to live here, our two daughters, Galia and Carmel, for them it was simply the only home they'd ever known. And this is where everything started for them.
And when you moved here, you were in a temporary house, temporary home, and then you set about building this home. And we're sitting here in this home, which was the home that was attacked on October the 7th by Hamas terrorists who stormed across the border through the fence. We'll talk about all of that. But I just want to ask you at the outset, how does it feel to be in this home now? I last saw you in Mishmar HaEmek up in the north, where you've been stationed. The kibbutz families in the north adopted and took in kibbutzim from the south, which is an incredible social story in and of itself. But now you're here. How does it feel to you to be back in this home?
When I get back here, and I've been coming here about once a week in the last 2-3 months, mostly because I'm writing a book these days about the history of my kibbutz and on the events of October 7. And so I go to our archive, the archive of Kibbutz Nahal Oz, which was not hurt on October 7. And it's a treasure trove of documents and images that are helping me write the history of this place. But every time I come here, I begin to breathe.
You do.
And I'm very, very grateful to our hosts in Kibbutz Mishmar HaEmek near Haifa. And they've been hosting us with incredible generosity and kindness for almost half a year now. And I love being there. My daughters love Mishmar HaEmek. They're happy there. But my home is over here. And when I come here, specifically to this house, something, becomes more relaxed. I feel some kind of weight dropping off my shoulders, which is interesting because one of the most famous pieces of history related to Nahal Oz is the Nahal Oz speech of Moshe Dayan in 1956. We can talk about it if you want, where he talked about the people of Nahal Oz shouldering the heavy gates of Gaza. This is literally the language he used. It refers, of course, to the biblical story of Samson, who lifted the gates of Gaza on his shoulders. When I come here, something drops from my shoulders. I feel less heavy when I enter my house.
So that's very interesting, because I would have thought that there was a weightiness about coming here, about coming back to this house. There are bullet holes in the windows we can see. You've shown me the shelter, the
safe room.
The safe room that's been on the media from country to country, all of the English-speaking media and elsewhere, I'm sure. Became very, very famous because of the story of yourself, your father, and we'll talk about all of that. But yet you're saying the opposite. You're saying that when you come here, you can breathe easily.
I think the first time I returned home, which was in November, it was difficult to see in broad daylight the damages to our home and to the homes of our neighbors. The second time I came a few weeks later was a little easier, and every time it's become more and more easy to come back home. And that doesn't erase 1 milligram from the pain and the tragedy and the concern for our two community members, two friends who are still held hostage in Gaza as we're speaking, Omri Miran and Tzachi Idan, both of them fathers of young children. But there is a sense of coming home that maybe fills me with a little bit of energy and optimism. That doesn't mean I'm forgetting for one second the huge challenges we're facing and the urgent need to take care first and foremost of the hostage issue. But on an emotional level, there is something about being here that for me feels good.
Have your children been back? Has Miri, your wife, been back?
Miri has been back several times, and I think she feels the same way as I, basically, that it's good to be home. It's a reminder of what a beautiful house we had built here. We have not brought back the girls. This is still not a place that's appropriate for children. I hope to bring them back once we will fix the physical damages to the house. I don't want to bring them to a living room where the windows are still scarred by bullet marks, and to a house that still has more than 30 bullets surrounding the walls in every direction. I want to bring them back to a house that will be like the house they remembered from October 6, a beautiful house that they know as their home.
So when you come back here and you feel this weight lifted off your shoulders, what I take from that is that I'm speaking to somebody who is resolute behind the idea that he's going to come back here, he's going to build his future here. It's an open discussion. I'm sure you even have internal discussions with other members of the kibbutz here. Is that your mindset, that this is where you're coming back to and this is where you want to build your future?
I would say that it's my hope, it's my dream. I think when we talk within our community today about coming back to Nahal Oz, you can divide the population into 3 segments. There are 2 small segments, which are the people who are saying, I'm not coming back, and the people who are saying, I'm 100% coming back, no doubt about it. The vast majority of the community, and I'm within that group, are people who say, I want to go back, I hope to go back, I'm working toward the goal of going back, but I have to see certain things change in order to raise my children here.
What are the things that can dash those hopes?
I think there are 2 main obstacles today relevant to all of the border communities, including Nahal Oz. Number 1 is the sense of security, that we're not coming back to the October 6 reality, where we can be surprised again, and where the lives of our families will be at risk again. The second thing is the social economic question. This part of Israel, the Negev at large, the South at large, has always been second best in the eyes of this country, I'm sorry to say. The same resources that go to other parts of the country don't always reach this area. And I think if we want to rebuild the communities along the border like Nahal Oz and make them flourish again and prosper again, we have to change that. We need to make this area a real priority for Israel. And it starts at the governmental level. And I can give you a lot of small examples that each one of them may sound small. For example, why does the train in Sderot, the nearest town here, stop at 7 p.m.? Why are there no trains in Sderot on Friday morning and Saturday evening? I'm not talking about the fact that there's no train service on Shabbat, which is a national problem, but even the little train service that exists on the weekends in other parts of Israel doesn't exist here. Why? Why is it more difficult for families who live here to get a doctor's appointment for a specialist than for those same families to get a specialist in the areas where they've been evacuated to after October 7? This is something that's causing a lot of frustration. People are saying, wait a second, why am I going back to a traumatic place, a place where something terrible happened, where I lost friends and neighbors, and at the same time I'm giving up vital quality of life issues for my children? These are 2 things that have to be addressed, the security reality and the social economic reality. I believe that if we will properly address both of them, most of the people in the affected communities, including Nahal Oz, will return home, and we will rebuild this place and make it 10 times better than it was on October 6.
Those are very lofty goals. The first one should be a prerequisite, right?
Yeah.
It should be that you're able to live in peace, security, safety.
Although, I want to say something, Benjamin, we will never have 100% security here.
So that's very interesting to me, because I've had a number of conversations with you, brief conversations since October 7th, and I've seen your stipulations morph a little bit.
I think in the beginning, after the event, there was some kind of a dream, I will call it, a fantasy, that there will be 100% security at the end of this war. I don't know if I personally shared it or only communicate that what others are saying, but I think we are mature enough to understand that this is a border community. This is not Switzerland. And hopefully one day there will be peace and we'll be able to live along this border like people live on the French-German border, 100 years after the World War I. That's not the situation today. But there has to be a certain level of security provided to these communities that was not provided on October 6. There needs to be much more strong presence of the military here on the ground. and not this reliance on technology and early warning systems, but boots on the ground. There need to be weapons in the hands of our local security team, what we call the Kitat Konenut. One of the biggest failures of October 7 is that the military forced these local small militias in every kibbutz in town to put their weapons in a central armory, and then they didn't have time to reach it when the terrorists came. That has to change. And there are other tactical changes, but there's also a strategic change that has to happen. Our enemies need to be afraid of us. We were telling ourselves a story that they are deterred and they've been hit hard and they're afraid of us before October 7. And that story was basically a lie. It was shared by the people in the highest offices in this country, but it was a total fabrication. We need our enemies to think very, very, very hard about attacking us, to be afraid of the consequences. And this is something that also has to change.
So let me ask you something about that then. We're now in the midst of this ongoing negotiations, this stop-start set of negotiations that's really holding everybody at high tension here in Israel for understandable reasons, for the return of the hostages. And what some might say is that you've got Sinwar there really feeling that the cards are held by him and that he can draw out these negotiations and that he's not afraid, despite all of the distraction that's been wrought on the Gaza Strip by Tzahal, by the Israel Defense Forces. Do you think that these enemies are now, given what Sinwar is doing, do you think that they are deterred at this stage?
I don't think Sinwar and Nasrallah are deterred of Israel at this point. I think Sinwar specifically, he's not afraid about the amount of people who will die in Gaza. We can kill 100,000 people there and he wouldn't care. He's afraid of losing control. He's afraid of losing power. This is what he's afraid of. He's afraid that the Gaza Strip, at the end of this war, will be controlled by someone else. I think if he had to choose someone else to control it, he would probably choose Israel, because then Hamas, and he doesn't think about himself, I think he thinks about Hamas as a movement, will morph itself into a guerrilla resistance against the foreign occupation. He's most afraid about some Arab force taking control of Gaza and basically taking away that card from him. And if at the end of this war, he can position himself as still the ruler of Gaza or as the freedom fighter against the Israel occupation, for him, it's not a big loss. And this is something that we need to take into consideration. And I think we see in the north, across the border with Lebanon, that Hezbollah is not deterred. Hezbollah is calculated, but that doesn't mean it's deterred. It's calculated, which means they're not opening a full-on aerial assault on Tel Aviv like they can, and they're not destroying the Tel Aviv area because they know Israel will then destroy Beirut and possibly also Damascus. But they're not deterred, they're just calculated. They're saying, okay, we have opened a limited war against Israel. We have evacuated the entire Israeli north, up to the line of Carmiel, basically. They've evacuated entire communities. Beirut is still standing. The IDF is bombing there from time to time, but the city life is not disrupted. And we can go on like this for a month. And that's not deterrence. And so, for me, this is a very, very important question. Will our enemies be deterred? Will they think twice and a third and a fourth time before attacking us like they did on October 7? And that's much more difficult to put your finger on, Benjamin, right? Because to say we need more forces here, we need more weapons here, that's actually something that it's easy to draw. Deterrence is a bit of an amorphous concept, but it's very important because this is the most important part of Israel's security strategy. If the enemies are not afraid of Israel, then Israel cannot provide security to its citizens.
So there's a lot there that I want to speak to you about, but I want to come to your personal story. I think that's what people will want to hear about now. I know you've told it many times. What, first of all, gives you the energy to tell it and to retell it the way that you do?
First of all, I think it's very important to share the story. We are facing today, and we're speaking half a year after October 7, we're facing a concentrated campaign to erase, minimize, and at worst, justify the October 7 attack. And our best weapon in front of that vicious campaign is our story. We need to tell our story. And we need to keep telling it and repeating it and get it to more and more audiences. And I also decided to write a book about the story. What's the book's
name, by the way?
The book is called The Gates of Gaza. It will be published in English, first of all, in the US by Little Brown and Company in early October. And it will also be published in the UK, Canada, Australia. And it will then be translated into German and French. I'm going to translate it myself into Hebrew. And my biggest mission right now is to get it translated into Arabic. I want people across the world to know this story and to understand what happened here. And to hear it from a person who experienced it, but then also went and did independent research and collected details and bits of information about it.
So The Gates of Gaza is a book that's coming into being as a result of the events of October 7th. So tell us about October 6th. Start there, the night of October 6th.
Yeah.
How did you finish your evening? And then talk to us about what took place on the 7th.
On October 6th, in the evening hours, Miri, my wife, and I, we were worried. Because the next day, October 7th, in the evening, was supposed to be the 70-year celebration of Kibbutz Nahal Oz. This kibbutz was founded in 1953, October 1953, by a group of 18 and 19-year-old men and women who had been sent here with a mission to build a new kibbutz directly on the border with Gaza.
When in October? Not October the 7th?
Not the 7th, but early October.
Okay.
And it wasn't a coincidence that we were going to celebrate on the evening of October 7th.
Right.
And on October 6th, there was a general rehearsal at the pool of the kibbutz for the next day's party. And there were some of the founders of the community. These are people, 87, 88-year-old today. They're still living with us. And there were many young families. And we were there in the general rehearsal because Galia, our 3.5-year-old daughter, was supposed to dance on the stage the next night. Right. And she and her kindergarten peers went up on the stage and they rehearsed 2 songs that they were going to dance to the following evening. These are classic Israeli folk songs for children. The first song, she was amazing. She did all the moves. She kept in timing.
Yeah.
The second song wasn't so good. She lost focus. She lost patience. She actually interrupted one of her friends in the dance.
She was more free-spirited.
Yeah, and we were worried. What's going to happen tomorrow night? There's going to be 500 people at the pool. The entire kibbutz is coming, and guests from all over the country are coming to this big celebration. It's a big moment. 70 years of Kibbutz Nahal Oz. And we said, what's going to happen? And then we made a plan. We said that Saturday morning, I will take little Carmel with me. At the time, she was 1.5 years old. I will take her to the playground, and Miri will stay with Galia, and right here in the living room, work with her on the dance until she knows all the moves perfect by heart. And that's how we went to sleep on October 6th, Friday night.
So that was the peak of your problems.
That was the biggest concern we had in the world. How will Galia do the next day in the kibbutz celebration?
And then October the 7th happens.
Yeah.
And presumably you're awakened by the sirens.
There was not a siren, actually. There was just the whistle of a mortar. And we were in bed, Miri and I, 6:30, and she gave me an elbow, and she said, there's a mortar.
Why was there not a siren?
I don't know. There are many questions that I've not found out the answers to.
So just so people understand, you made a point earlier about the rockets coming from the Gaza Strip, but what they actually bombard Nahal Oz with is mortars.
Both mortars and rockets.
But mortars are a central aspect
of
that.
Yeah, because mortars are launched to a shorter range.
Exactly.
It's important to understand, Benjamin, ever since we moved here in the fall of 2014, we have experienced hundreds of rocket and mortar attacks on the community. When it happens, you have no time to think. Over here, you have 7 seconds to reach shelter. For comparison, when they launch a rocket at Tel Aviv, there's 90 seconds to reach shelter. Which
it's a lifetime.
We can bathe a baby. We used to laugh about it when our girls were younger, that if we go to visit my parents in Tel Aviv and there's a siren, first of all, we bathe the girls and then we go down to the shelter.
Right.
Over here, you have 7 seconds.
Yeah.
So you just have to run. And you know that there's no Iron Dome. So you really have to be very, very focused. And we heard the whistle of the mortar, and Miri gave me this elbow, and we got out of bed and we ran to the safe room, which is this room, over here. The safe room is a room built of thick concrete, and in every home in Nahal Oz and in the other border communities, there is a room like that, which is supposed to withstand a direct hit by a rocket or a mortar. This means that even if the mortar, God forbid, lands on our house, if we are in the safe room and we've closed the heavy iron door of the safe room, and we've covered the window with a metal plate that is basically connected to the wall and you can use it at times of need, nothing will happen to us. And in most families, the safe room is where you put the kids to sleep at night. Because then if there's a siren or a mortar at 6:30 in the morning, the parents run to the children's room and not the other way around. Right. So we hear this whistle, we run to the safe room, we close the door, we cover the window, it's dark inside, the girls are sleeping, and we are calm, because we've been through this many, many dozens of times. It's part of our life here. It's part of our mission of being here and holding onto this border. And we know that this is sometimes a bombarded area. It's something we took into the calculation with our decision to move here. So we are not worried, we're not panicked, and we realize that since it's not a single mortar, but it's a barrage, it's a bombardment, we realize we have to start packing.
So this starts, you have this bombardment coming in, and then this takes a turn that's completely unexpected, totally unprecedented.
Yeah.
What exactly was that turn? At what point did you realize, okay, this is worse than anything that we could have anticipated?
So while we are packing in the dark 2 suitcases for the girls, because we tell ourselves, okay, a new war has broken with Gaza. And now we're going to be out of home for 10 days, maybe 14. That's our experience from previous rounds of fighting. We have to prepare, clothes and things for the girls. And once the mortar fire will stop for a few minutes, we'll shove them in the car and drive east, away from the border. And again, we've done this many, many times. So we're on automatic pilot. We're not worried.
I didn't know you've done that. You've done that several times in previous wars.
Think about Operation Guardian of the Wars in May 2020.
Yeah.
Back then, actually, it's interesting. We had a better understanding of the reality. Itamar Ben-Gvir was causing provocations in Jerusalem, and Hamas was threatening to start a war, and so we left that morning, and we were not caught by the barrage. When the barrage began, we were already out of here. This time we were surprised, but that's also happened in some rounds of fighting, that we were surprised and realized, okay, we have to pack, and in the first opportunity, get out of here.
Okay.
And that's what we're doing in the dark, and the girls are asleep. But then, shortly after 7 a.m., we begin to hear automatic gunfire. And it's a little distant at first, but it gets closer and closer, and that's when we realize something different is happening, because it's important to understand, Benjamin. This kibbutz has existed along the border for 70 years, as I told you. And throughout its history, there were always security threats. There were ambushes in the fields in the 1950s. The most famous one was the ambush that killed Ro'i Ruthberg. And in his funeral, Dayan gave that unique historical speech about Nahal Oz. In the 60s, there were landmines. In 1968, 2 members of the kibbutz were killed by a landmine that was hidden in the field. In the 1970s, hand grenades were thrown at cars on the roads here. There's a famous song about it in Israel by Arik Einstein. He sings, "Soon a hand grenade will hit our car. I hope we don't go to hell." This is in 1974. There was an intifada in the late 80s and another intifada in the 2000s. But one thing never ever happened here. A terrorist never stepped foot inside this community. Even in the 50s and 60s and 70s, when there was no border fence, a terrorist never entered this kibbutz. And when we begin to hear automatic gunfire, and we realize that it's actually now in our neighborhood, I tell Miri, this is different. This is something that never happened before.
There has to have been a point at which you understood that there was a terrorist inside Nahal Oz. What was that point?
Around 7:10, we begin to see messages in the WhatsApp group of our neighborhood that people are saying there's a Hamas invasion of the kibbutz. The gunfire becomes much closer, and at 7:15, we have a group of terrorists standing here on our front porch, firing into our living room through the main window. Now, it's important to understand the door is locked. The blinds are all rolled all the way down. These are electric blinds. The windows are shut, so the house is dark. The terrorists cannot see into the house, and we cannot see them outside of it, but we hear them. And we hear their bullets entering our living room. It's a very, very strong noise, and we are not sure if it's coming from inside the house or outside the house. And that's when the girls wake up.
And this is the living room that we're sitting in now.
Right here, yes.
And these are the bullet holes.
These are the bullet holes they made, yes.
And so, I mean, had you not, for example, put down your blinds,
they would have just entered the house.
they'd have come straight in.
They would have just entered the house. Yeah. There's a lot of luck in situations like this in life. Fate, you can call it. And very, very small decisions that were made or not made can make the whole difference. There was a key to this door, hidden in a place where we always hide a key in case, someone is locked out of the house, a neighbor needs to come in and take something. The terrorists could have found that key. They just didn't look for it.
And when I visited you on Nahal Oz, when you first moved here, you were in a different home.
Smaller home than this one.
Now, had you been in that home, what would have
They
been your
probably
fate?
would have broke into the house, and I don't want to think about what would have happened then. But they did not manage to break into this house, the current one where we're living today, because the door was locked, the windows were shut, the blinds were rolled down. That was very important. Because there's actually a video that the terrorists took of themselves through cameras on their helmets where you see them on our front porch, firing into the house, firing at neighbors' houses and trying to break in. Right. It's all caught on film.
Now, part of this situation is not just the past. It's not just that no terrorist had ever walked on the soil of Nahal Oz. There's another element to this, which is that for you to be able to move here, for you and Miri to be able to raise your two daughters here, you have to have uppermost faith in the Israel Defense Forces. Yes. And so you're presumably hearing this, and there must be a voice inside you that's saying, the IDF is on its way, if this is the case. Am I right? I don't think I've asked you that, but am I correct about that or not?
We realized that this is like the Yom Kippur War, that we've been surprised. Remember, Benjamin, it's the morning of Simchat Torah. Right. Now, we're not very religious people, but you cannot miss the symbolicness that 50 years, almost to the day after the Yom Kippur War, on another Jewish holiday when the military is not with full forces on the border, suddenly the enemy attacks. And I immediately told Miri, this is the Yom Kippur War.
הפגזת קטיושות הכבדה ביותר הייתה הלילה בקריית שמונה. לא פחות מ-30 טילים שנורו על ידי מחבלים מתחום לבנון התפוצצו בשעות הקטנות של הלילה בתחום העיירה ובסביבתה.
And this smart fence and the underground wall that we had constructed is the Bar-Lev line, that famous line of defense that collapsed on the first day of the Yom Kippur War in the Sinai. But I do want to say that there was a small force here that sprung into action and made a huge difference for this community.
But you still are here, you're hearing that there are bullets being fired to the point where you don't know if the terrorists are in or out of your house, or inside your home or outside your home rather, and at some point you decide, you're in the mamad, you're in the safe room at this time, right? Already in there, and you decide you're not packing and moving, you need to stay put.
Once we heard the gunfire, even before the gunfire on the house, we realized that we're not going to be able to go anywhere because we said, okay, this is a different kind of event.
And to be clear, you're not armed. You don't keep a firearm in the house.
I did not have a gun at home, and we were just locked inside. And again, we had this expectation that perhaps the military will arrive. It's important to remember, Benjamin, there's a big military base 5 minutes from here. You know, across a small road that leads to our community and to that big army base. And that base was attacked at the same time that our kibbutz was attacked. And more than 60 soldiers were killed there. And so this base, which was supposed to provide defense also for communities like Nahal Oz, was itself under attack, and the brave, courageous soldiers that were fighting to protect their own territory. And I believe every terrorist that they killed there is one less terrorist who could have come here and killed people in the kibbutz. But their first and foremost mission was to hold their ground. They could not leave and come fight over here.
So at what point do you decide that you're going to hunker down and you're going to call your father? I don't know exactly what your thought process was when you called your father.
I had no expectation that he would come here.
You had no expectation because now the story is world famous that your father came here. We'll get to all of that in a moment.
I had no expectation that he would come here.
But you've got a more urgent issue, which is you've got terrorists. You don't know if they're in the house, as we said, or outside the house, and you've got two young girls. And if those two young girls start crying and these terrorists are in your house,
or even outside,
that's going to lead them directly to you. So how did you deal with that?
So our first mission was to keep the girls calm. Because, as you described it so well, we are not sure what the terrorists know about us. Do they know there's a family in this house or not? The house is locked, dark, and if they start hearing little children crying, it will signal to them that there's a family inside. But what if we keep silent? Maybe they don't pay attention to this house. And so we said, okay, first and foremost, keep the girls calm. Now, that required a lot from us.
Yes.
We had to stay calm, first of all, because children don't follow orders in the sense of you tell them what to do and they do it.
You follow example.
Children follow example. And by the way, this is also true of adults. I think the biggest problem in this country today is a lack of personal example by the leadership. We can talk about it later. But we, first of all, had to provide an example to our girls, showing them that, yes, there are noises outside that we don't like. We were not denying the reality. Miri, because they woke up from the gunfire, Miri told them, girls, there's dangerous noise outside. It's very loud. And it means we have to stay quiet here in the room. And we cannot go outside and play. We cannot go outside and eat. We had no food in the room. We cannot bring you any toys. There's no light in the room because the electricity had fallen at around 6:45. And we have to stay very, very quiet. And the fact that she did all of this in a very calm voice, and I basically repeated the same message also with a very calm voice, convinced them that, okay, there's something going on. This is not a usual morning, but there's a reason now to stay quiet and at the same time not to lose it. This is what we were trying to broadcast to them.
So you gave them partial truth.
Yes.
You acknowledged that there's
If you just deny everything, they're not going to buy it.
Right.
They're not going to listen. Okay. There are gunfire noises coming from the living room.
Right.
And you cannot tell them, oh, this is nothing. But you have to keep them calm and focused on what we need to do right now, which is to be here, to be calm, and to be quiet.
So they keep quiet.
Yeah.
And that probably in an odd way calmed you as well, right? To see that they're cooperating.
I think that the sense of responsibility for others is something that a lot of times allows us to do things that would have been much more difficult for us if we were only responsible for ourselves. Think about soldiers, by the way, who on that day ran into the line of fire. The only thing I think that would bring them to do it is a sense of responsibility for us, for the civilians they were trying to save. Otherwise, why would you put your life on the line like that? In a very, very, very difficult way. And for us, this was a smaller example. We did not run into the line of fire, but knowing that we were responsible now for these two young girls gave us the confidence to also remain calm and focused.
So you reach out to your father. For those who don't know, your father is a retired Major General in the Israel Defense Forces. His final his final role there was he was the head of the Northern Formation in the Israel Defense Forces. He joined the IDF through the Chief of Staff's reconnaissance unit, Sayeret Matkal, the storage unit that undertook the raid on Entebbe and numerous other missions. Most of the missions are unknown.
Yes.
And you message him. Now let's just give everybody the context. While you're seeing that there are mortars being fired, he's swimming in Tel Aviv, and there are rockets being fired towards Tel Aviv. There's a siren there. He's there with your mother. And they get the benefit of this full 90 seconds of warning.
No, forget the 90 seconds. They just stay in the water.
They stay in the water.
It's important to understand. Right. You know, this country, we say there are three religions here, right? Yeah. There's Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. In Tel Aviv, there's the fourth religion, fitness.
Right.
And my parents are adherents of that faith.
Right.
So on Saturday morning, they go to swim, and nothing will get them out of the water, not even Hamas.
Right.
And so they're in the water, 6:30, a barrage on Tel Aviv, and they just keep swimming for another half an hour.
Keep swimming there.
7, אזעקה. ואני אומרת לו, נועם, אזעקה. בסדר, אזעקה. מסיימים את הסיבוב. ואתה יודע גם על החוף, על הטיילת, עוד מלא אנשים הולכים, רצים, תל אביבים, מה קדוש? הספורט. אז ממשיכים.
But when they come out and they begin to get the messages from us about what's happening, they realize that, okay, this is not a regular, which is by itself a crazy thing to say, but it's not a regular war with Hamas. So, okay, they're firing at us, we're firing at them, and in a week or two it will be over. This is something different. There's an invasion.
אנחנו נכנסים לאוטו ומחכות לנו הודעות.
And I think for my parents, what really made the difference was the moment I told them there are terrorists inside the neighborhood, potentially inside the house. My father is 62 years old, and so is my mother. She's a retired high school principal. Both of them are people with a strong grasp of history. My father did his university degrees in history. My mother was a history teacher, and she holds a PhD in history. Specifically, she researched the history of the Holocaust in Romania.
Right.
Both of them remembered this important piece of history that I just told you a few minutes ago. That throughout the 70-year history of Kibbutz Nahal Oz on the border, a terrorist had never entered this community. Yes, there were ambushes, yes, there were mortars, there were many dangers. A terrorist never stepped foot here. And when they heard from us that terrorists were walking between the houses, firing into people's homes, my father basically realized that something very, very strange is happening and that the defense lines of Israel have been breached. And this is what caused them to just get into their vehicle and start driving here.
They start driving down towards you. But I just want to be clear. You text your parents to let them know about this.
And then we also spoke on the phone.
And you spoke, but you're not texting them because your father's a retired Major General. You're texting them because it's your father. Is that right?
It's because everybody at that moment was telling their relatives what was happening here.
Right.
I did have a hope that maybe my father would be able to talk to someone in the military to send forces here. And by the way, I also spoke about that idea with two of my colleagues at the newspaper, Amos Harel, our long-time defense analyst, who, by the way, wrote a week before October 7 that Israel is deluding itself, that Hamas will take economic benefits and change its nature.
Yeah.
He wrote this on September 29.
Yeah.
I called him and I called Yaniv Kubovich, who's another military reporter, and I said, guys, just so you know, there's terrorists inside the kibbutz now. And the same thing with my father, maybe they will alert someone in the military to send forces here. I did not have the full picture yet of what was happening all over the border region, that it's not just an attack on Nahal Oz, that every kibbutz, every town, and every military base in our entire area is now under attack, and that there's nobody to send here, basically. Amos actually told me that. Amos was a very good friend and one of the best journalists in this country. He told me, I will talk to everyone I know in the military, but you have to take into consideration that the entire region is under attack and it will take time for the military to arrive.
Tune in to the next episode of Israel Outside In, the October Chronicles, for part 2 of this exclusive interview with Amir Tibon, survivor of the October Massacre and author of the newly released book, The Gates of Gaza. If you're interested in investing in the next generation of Israeli and American leadership for the benefit of both countries and the relationship between the two, then please take the time to learn about and to invest in the Miriam Institute annual Israel Strategy and Policy Tour, or ISAP, as we like to call it.
First off, I never thought I would be in Israel. When I saw that this was an opportunity, I put my name.
We really got to see the entire country in 10 days, experience the culture.
The Jewish culture was really impressive for me.
Try to get people to love each other and not to hate each other.
Really impressed by all of the different types of speakers we were able to hear.
It's for cadets, future and current officers of the United States Armed Forces, including the Army, Navy, Air Force and Marine Corps. The ISAP tour brings the best and the brightest active and incoming officers to Poland for a 3-day tour of the Polish death camps, followed by a 12-day, once-in-a-lifetime tour of the State of Israel that crisscrosses the Jewish state. 100% of the participants will go on to serve in positions of leadership within the military and beyond. The ISAP tour is your way to invest in the leaders of today and tomorrow, now.
So happy that I was selected and I was able to come. Thank you so much for the opportunity and everything you guys have done here. It's really awesome.
For the sake of the US-Israel relationship, please visit the website today at www.miriaminstitute.org/ISAP.